"You're not invited." My mom said it like it was the most normal sentence in the world. Not angry, not apologetic, just casual, like she was reminding me to buy milk or something. And for a second I actually thought I heard her wrong. Because who says that to their daughter about their own parents' anniversary? There was a little silence on the phone after she said it. Not a dramatic silence, just that awkward pause where neither person knows what to do next. I remember staring at the wall in my apartment kitchen. There was this tiny crack near the cabinet door that I'd been meaning to fix for weeks. And suddenly that crack felt more interesting than the conversation. "Oh," I said. I tried to laugh. It came out weird, like half a laugh and half something else. "Well, yeah, of course." My mom kept talking after that, explaining something about the dinner being small and mostly friends. I honestly don't remember the exact words. Actually, no, wait. I do remember one part. She said, "Brian and Sandra helped organize everything. Brian is my older brother. Sandra is her friend. Not family, just someone she plays tennis with. Apparently both of them counted as close enough to attend." I didn't. But I didn't argue. That's probably something people would expect, right? A confrontation. A dramatic moment. I didn't do that. I just said something like, "Sounds nice. I hope it goes well." And then we hung up. The whole call lasted maybe 4 minutes. Afterward, I stood there in my kitchen for a while, holding my phone. I remember thinking, maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But honestly, my mom has always meant exactly what she says. Her version of politeness just hides it better. Anyway, hi, my name's Emma Carter. I'm 24, and apparently I wasn't invited to my own parents' 30th wedding anniversary. Which, when I say it out loud like that, it sounds kind of dramatic. But at the time, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt familiar. That's the weird part. I grew up in a house where things were never openly cruel, just quietly uneven. My brother Brian was the practical one, the one my dad talked about with pride. Brian understands how the real world works. My mom loved saying that. I was the one who liked creative things, which, in my family, was basically a polite way of saying impractical. I don't think my parents ever meant to make it obvious, but kids notice patterns. For example, when Brian graduated college, my parents threw him this big dinner at a steakhouse. My mom invited like 15 people. I remember helping decorate the table. I was 19 then. My dad kept saying things like, "This is a big moment." And it was. Brian had just gotten his first job in finance. Everyone was proud of him. I was proud too, actually. But I also remember standing there with a roll of tape and thinking, I wonder what it feels like when people celebrate you like that. Not in a jealous way. Just curious. Anyway, back to the anniversary thing. A few days after that phone call, my cousin Maya texted me. Maya is one of the only people in my family who talks to me like a normal human being. She wrote, "Are you going to the anniversary dinner next month?" I stared at the message for a while. Then I typed, "Apparently not." She responded almost immediately, "Wait, what?" I told her what my mom said. There was a long pause. Then Maya called me. The first thing she said when I answered was, "Emma, that's weird." I shrugged even though she couldn't see me. "It's fine," I said, which was technically true. Or at least, I thought it was. Looking back now, I think that moment mattered more than I realized. Because Maya said something that stuck with me. She said, "Do they even know what you're doing these days?" And I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because I genuinely didn't know the answer. My parents and I talk maybe once every few weeks. Mostly small things. Weather, work, my mom asking if I was still busy with that design thing. Which, okay, that part actually makes me laugh now. Because the design thing she was talking about, it had just changed my entire life. But she didn't know that. And honestly, I never corrected her. That's the part one still wonder about sometimes. Maybe if I had said more earlier, the whole story would have gone differently. Or maybe not. Anyway, a week after that phone call with Maya, something happened. Something small. But it changed everything. I was at a hotel downtown, the Westbridge Grand. And the moment I walked through the lobby doors, the front desk supervisor looked up, smiled, and said something that made me stop walking. He said, "Good afternoon, Ms. Carter. Mr. Ortiz is waiting for you upstairs." And that's when I remembered something important. Something my parents definitely didn't know. Their anniversary dinner was being held in this exact hotel. And suddenly, the whole situation started to feel very different. The lobby of the Westbridge Grand always smells a little like citrus. I know that sounds like a weird detail to remember, but when you walk in there often enough, little things stick. The polished marble floors, the quiet piano music that's never loud enough to really listen to, and that citrus cleaning smell. Anyway, when the front desk supervisor said, "Good afternoon, Ms. Carter. Mr. Ortiz is waiting for you upstairs," I kind of froze for a second. Not dramatically, just mid-step, like my brain needed an extra second to catch up. The guy who greeted me was Jordan Miles. He'd only been working there a few months, but he already recognized me. That still felt strange. Honestly, I smiled and walked up to the desk. "Thanks, Jordan," I said. He nodded toward the elevators. "Conference level. Mr. Ortiz said to send you straight up when you arrived." I thanked him again and headed toward the elevator. And somewhere between the lobby and the fourth floor, my parents popped into my head again. Actually, that's not completely accurate. They'd been in my head all morning, but the connection hadn't fully clicked yet. Not until the elevator doors closed. Because that's when I remembered something Maya had mentioned during our phone call. She'd said, "Your parents booked the private dining room at the Westbridge. Olivia's organizing it." Olivia Park, the hotel's event coordinator. At the time I didn't react much when Maya told me that, but standing in that elevator, suddenly it felt different. The little digital number above the door slowly counting up. 2, 3, 4. And I remember thinking, wait, the doors opened. I stepped out into the conference hallway. It was quieter up there. Carpeted floors, softer lighting. One of those places where everyone instinctively lowers their voice even if they are alone. At the end of the hallway, Daniel Ortiz was standing outside one of the meeting rooms. He spotted me and smiled. Daniel was the hotel's general manager. Tall guy, early 40s maybe. Always calm in that very professional hotel manager way. "Emma," he said as I walked over. "Good to see you again." "Good to see you too," I said. We shook hands, which still felt weird every time it happened, because 2 years ago I was the one nervously introducing myself to him. Now we were meeting regularly. Life changes fast like that sometimes. He gestured toward the conference room. "We've got the updated floor plans ready." We went inside. The room was set up with a long table and a few printed layouts spread across it. Also sitting there was Natalie Chen. She waved when she saw me. Natalie is, well, technically my business partner. But partner makes it sound very official. Most days it still feels like two friends figuring things out as we go. "Hey," she said. "You're late." "I'm 2 minutes late." 3. Daniel laughed quietly and sat down at the table. "All right," he said. "Let's go over the changes." Now, before I explain the rest of that meeting, there's something I should probably clarify. Because earlier I mentioned my mom asking if I was still busy with that design thing. At the time she said it, I didn't correct her. Not because I was hiding anything exactly. More because explaining it felt exhausting. You know when someone has already decided what your life is. Trying to update them feels pointless. Anyway, that design thing started as a freelance interior design job. Mostly small restaurant spaces at first. Coffee shops, boutique stores. Nothing fancy. Natalie handled the business side. I handled the design work. For the first year we were barely paying rent. Actually, I might be remembering that wrong. We were paying rent, just very nervously. Then about 8 months ago, something unexpected happened. One of our restaurant clients hosted a private event. A hotel manager attended that event. That manager happened to be Daniel Ortiz. He liked the space. A lot. A few weeks later he called us about redesigning one of the Westbridge Hotel lounges, which, at the time, felt enormous. But then the project grew, and grew, and grew. Eventually Natalie and I found ourselves sitting in regular meetings with the general manager of one of the nicest hotels in the city, which is how I ended up standing in that elevator earlier that afternoon. Anyway, back to the conference room. Daniel slid one of the floor plans toward me. "We've finalized the restaurant renovation schedule," he said. "Construction starts next month." Natalie leaned over the table. "Finally," she said. Daniel nodded. "And assuming everything stays on track, we'll be opening the new private dining floor by early summer." That part still made my stomach flip a little when I heard it, because the private dining floor, that was my design. Every room, every layout, every stupid little detail like the lighting angles and the wall textures. I ran my hand across the paper, still not fully believing it, and that's when Daniel casually added something that made me pause. "Speaking of private dining," he said, flipping through another document, "we have a small anniversary event booked there next month." He tapped the page. "Carter Party, 30th anniversary." For a second, I thought I misheard him. Actually, I definitely thought I misheard him, because my brain did this weird thing where it just refused to connect the dots immediately. But then I saw the name written right there on the page. Richard and Linda Carter. My parents. Natalie noticed my face first. She frowned slightly. "You okay?" I stared at the paper. Then I let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," I said. "Well, this is awkward." Daniel looked between us. "What is?" And that's when I said something that none of us expected to matter very much at the time. I said, "That anniversary dinner." I tapped the page. "Those are my parents." For a second, nobody said anything. Not in a dramatic way. Just that quiet pause where three people are trying to process the same piece of information at the same time. Daniel looked down at the paper again, then back at me. "Your parents," he said. I nodded. "Yeah." Natalie leaned closer to the table, squinting at the reservation sheet like maybe it would suddenly show a different name. "Wait, Carter," she asked. I almost laughed. "Yes, Natalie, those Carters." She sat back in her chair slowly. "Well, that's weird." Daniel glanced at both of us, still calm but clearly curious. "I assume that means you'll be attending the event." That's when I felt that weird little twist in my stomach again, the same one I'd felt during the phone call with my mom. I rubbed my hands together for a second. "Actually," I said. Then I stopped, because suddenly explaining this out loud felt incredibly stupid. "I mean, how do you say something like that?" "Oh yeah, my parents are celebrating 30 years of marriage, and they specifically told me not to come." It sounded ridiculous even in my own head. Natalie looked at me. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Emma," she said slowly, "why do I feel like the answer to that question is complicated?" I let out a breath. "Because it is." Daniel didn't interrupt. He just waited, which I appreciated. Hotel managers are weirdly good at that, waiting quietly while people decide how much they want to say. Finally I shrugged. "They didn't invite me." "There. Said it. Simple sentence." Natalie blinked. "Sorry, what?" "They are keeping it small, apparently," I said, making little air quotes with my fingers. Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's unusual." "Yeah." I tapped the paper again. "They invited my brother, my mom's tennis friend, probably half the neighborhood." Natalie stared at me like she was trying to decide whether I was joking. "You're serious?" I nodded. For a few seconds nobody spoke. Then Natalie muttered something very quiet in Mandarin under her breath. I don't speak Mandarin fluently, but we've worked together long enough that I can usually guess the tone. It was not a polite sentence. Daniel cleared his throat gently. "Well," he said carefully, that does create an interesting situation. I laughed a little, only if you think about it too hard, which, to be fair, I had been trying not to do. But once the connection was out there, it was impossible to ignore. My parents were hosting a private anniversary dinner at a hotel on a floor that I had literally designed. Natalie leaned forward again. "Wait," she said. "Hold on." She pointed at the reservation sheet. "They don't know about this, do they?" I frowned. "About what?" "About you." She gestured around the room. "The hotel. The project. Any of it." And that's when I realized something. I honestly didn't know. My parents and I talked maybe once every few weeks. Usually quick calls. Weather. Work. My mom asking vague questions like, "Are you still doing that design thing?" And I'd always just say yes. The truth was, explaining the full situation felt weirdly uncomfortable. Not because it was secret, just because I could already imagine the conversation. My mom would say something like, "Oh, that's nice, honey." Then change the subject. So I stopped trying. I shrugged. They probably think I'm still designing coffee shops. Natalie stared at me. "Emma." "What?" "You redesigned half this building." "That's an exaggeration." "A small exaggeration," she said. Daniel smiled slightly. "Technically, it's about 40%. Natalie pointed at him. "See?" I laughed again, but something about the whole situation was starting to feel strange. Not upsetting exactly, just strange. Daniel flipped through the event file again. "Your parents booked the Orchid dining room," he said. I knew that room very well. The Orchid room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, soft gold lighting, a long curved dining table, and a wall installation I spent 2 weeks obsessing over because the wood panels wouldn't line up perfectly. I could picture the entire space in my head instantly. Natalie was watching me think. I could tell. She leaned back slowly. "Oh no," she said. I blinked. "What?" "I know that face." "What face?" "That face you make when you're about to do something." I frowned. "I'm not doing anything." She tilted her head. "Emma, I'm serious." And I was, at least, at that moment. Because honestly, the thought of interfering with my parents' anniversary dinner had never crossed my mind before. If anything, I had been trying very hard not to think about it at all. Daniel closed the event folder. "Well," he said, "for what it's worth, your parents chose one of the nicest rooms in the building." "Good for them," I said. And I meant that. I really did. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes. We talked about construction timelines, furniture orders, lighting fixtures, normal work stuff. But somewhere in the back of my mind, that reservation file kept floating around. Carter party, 30-year anniversary, Orchid dining room. Eventually the meeting wrapped up. Natalie and I walked out into the hallway together. She didn't say anything at first, just walked beside me toward the elevator. Then finally she spoke. "Okay." I glanced at her. "Okay, what?" "You're thinking about it." "Thinking about what?" She pressed the elevator button. "This." She waved her hand vaguely toward the hotel around us. "The fact that your parents are throwing a party in a space you designed, and they have absolutely no idea." The elevator doors slid open. We stepped inside. I stared at the floor numbers lighting up as we descended. 4, 3, 2. "I'm not planning anything," I said. Natalie crossed her arms. "Sure. I'm serious." She studied my face for a moment. Then she sighed. "Okay," she said. "Maybe you're not planning anything." The elevator dinged as we reached the lobby. The doors opened, and Natalie added one more sentence before we stepped out. "But if you were planning something." She glanced around the lobby. This hotel would be a very interesting place to do it. I didn't answer, but later that night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about something. Not revenge, not embarrassment, nothing dramatic like that. Just one quiet thought that kept repeating in my head. My parents had told me, You don't need to come. And technically, they were right, because the truth was, I didn't need an invitation. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset. At least, I don't think that was the reason. It was more like my brain kept circling the same thought over and over again. My parents, the anniversary dinner, the hotel, and that weird sentence Natalie said in the elevator. If you were planning something. I wasn't planning anything. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Still, around 2 in the morning I found myself opening my laptop, which probably says something. I pulled up the Westbridge event layout files, mostly out of habit. That's what I told myself anyway. The Orchid dining room floor plan appeared on the screen. I stayed at it for a while. That room had been one of the hardest parts of the project. Large windows along the riverside, warm gold lighting built into the ceiling panels, soft walnut walls, and the long curved dining table right in the center. I remember arguing with Natalie about that table for almost 3 hours. She thought it was too dramatic. I thought the room needed something bold. Looking at it now, I still think I was right. Anyway, the event file was attached to the layout. Just basic details. Date, time, guest count, 12 people. I recognized a few names immediately. Brian Carter, my brother. No surprise there. Sandra Lewis, my mom's tennis friend. Also not surprising. Then I saw Maya Bennett and her husband Mark on the list. That made me pause. Maya had asked me if I was going, which means she probably assumed I was invited. I suddenly wondered how that conversation would go when she arrived and realized I wasn't there. Actually, maybe she already suspected something. Maya notices things. She always has. I kept scrolling through the list. Then I stopped, because suddenly I realized something kind of funny. Well, maybe not funny. Strange. Every single person attending that dinner knew my parents, but not one of them knew what I had been doing for the last year. Not really. To them I was still the quiet daughter who liked creative things. I leaned back in my chair, and that's when a thought crossed my mind. Not a plan. Just a thought. What would happen if my parents walked into that hotel, and someone said my name? Not dramatically, just casually, like it was normal. I sat there for a minute, then I shook my head and closed the laptop. Don't be weird, Emma, I muttered to myself, because honestly, the idea felt childish, petty even, and that's not really my personality. At least I don't think it is, but the thought kept coming back anyway. The next morning, Natalie called me, which was unusual. She usually texts. Good morning, menace, she said the moment I answered. I frowned. Why am I a menace? Because I know you. That's not evidence. She laughed. So, did you do anything last night? What do you mean? I mean, she said, did you sit there plotting a dramatic social experiment involving your parents and the hotel? No. Pause. Well, not exactly. Natalie made a noise like she'd just confirmed something. Emma. What? You're thinking about it. I'm thinking about how weird the situation is. I said, that's different. Sure. I sighed and walked into the kitchen. Look, I said, I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I know. And I'm definitely not crashing their anniversary dinner. I know that too. I opened the fridge and stared at it without really looking. But, Natalie added, I closed the fridge slowly. But what? But you also don't want to pretend the whole thing isn't happening. She was right about that. That part bothered me more than the invitation thing. The idea that my parents could sit in that room I designed, eat dinner under lights I chose, surrounded by walls I spent months working on, and never once realize I had anything to do with it. It felt strange. Natalie must have heard the silence on the phone. She softened her voice a little. Emma, she said, what do you actually want? That question caught me off guard, because I hadn't really asked myself that yet. Did I want an apology, recognition, validation? Honestly, I wasn't sure. I leaned against the kitchen counter. I said slowly, I just want them to realize something. What? That they don't know me. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed the direction of the conversation. You know, Daniel asked about the guest hosting list yesterday. I blinked. The what? For private dining events, she explained. Sometimes the person who organized the event sends a host greeting. Oh, it was a normal thing hotels did. If someone paid for a big event, the staff would greet guests with something like, "Welcome to the Johnson anniversary celebration." That kind of thing. Natalie continued, Your parents didn't send one. So the hotel usually fills it in with a default greeting. I frowned. Why are you telling me this? There was a small pause on the phone. Then Natalie said very carefully, because technically, the orchid dining floor belongs to your project contract. I straightened up a little. What do you mean? I mean, she said slowly, Daniel listed you as the design host for the private dining opening period. That took a second to process. Wait, I said. You mean? Yes, Natalie replied. For the first 3 months after opening, events on that floor are technically hosted under the designer credit. My brain went very quiet, because suddenly something clicked. Something small, but powerful. Natalie must have heard it happen. Emma, she said, I know that silence. I sat down at the kitchen table. You're saying, I started, that if the hotel staff greet guests at that dinner. Yes, she said, they would technically greet them as guests of the floor host. And the floor host is you. I rubbed my forehead. This was starting to feel surreal. Okay, I said slowly, but nobody would actually say that. Natalie didn't answer right away, which immediately made me suspicious. Natalie. Yes. What are you not telling me? She sighed. Nothing dramatic. That's not reassuring. Well, she said, I might have mentioned the situation to Daniel this morning. My eyes widened. You what? Relax, she said quickly. I didn't tell him anything personal, just that your parents are the Carter reservation. I covered my face with one hand. Oh my God. And he thought it was interesting. Of course he did. Hotel managers love interesting situations. I dropped my hand and stayed at the wall. So what happens now? Natalie hesitated. Then she said, Well, Daniel asked one question. I waited. What question? Her voice got very quiet. He asked if Ms. Carter would like the standard greeting or a personalized one. I didn't answer Natalie right away. Not because I was trying to be dramatic. I just genuinely didn't know what to say. The kitchen clock was ticking behind me, and suddenly that sound felt very loud. Emma, Natalie said, I'm here. So, I rubbed my forehead again. This is ridiculous. What is? The fact that we're even discussing this. Natalie didn't argue. She just waited. Which, honestly, was worse. Okay, I said finally. What exactly did Daniel say? He said the hotel normally greets guests when they arrive for private events. I know that part. Right. So if there's no custom greeting provided, they just say something neutral. Like what? Natalie cleared her throat. Something like, Welcome to the Carter anniversary dinner. That sounded normal enough. I nodded slowly. Okay. But, Natalie added, of course there was a but. But because you're listed as the floor design host during the opening period. I finished the sentence quietly. They'd technically be guests of mine. Yes. The words just kind of hung there. I leaned back in my chair. Wow. Natalie laughed softly. Yeah. Okay, I said after a moment. But nobody would actually phrase it like that. Well, she said, and I immediately knew she was about to say something dangerous. Natalie, I'm just saying it's an option. What option? The personalized greeting Daniel mentioned. I closed my eyes for a second. You're enjoying this way too much. I'm enjoying the poetic irony, she corrected. Not helping. She sighed. Emma, I'm not suggesting you humiliate your parents. I know. But imagine this for a second, she continued carefully. Your parents walk into the hotel lobby. The manager greets them politely, completely professional, nothing embarrassing. Okay. And he simply says something like, she paused for effect. Welcome. You're guests of your daughter. She hosts this floor. I opened my eyes. For a second, I just stayed at the kitchen wall. Because the sentence sounded so simple. But the impact of it, that would land very differently. My mom would freeze immediately. My dad would probably frown in confusion. Honestly, Brian would probably assume it was a mistake. I exhaled slowly. This is starting to sound like a social experiment. Natalie laughed again. Maybe a little. I stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, the street was quiet. A few cars passing by, a couple walking their dog. Normal life. Meanwhile, I was apparently considering orchestrating a psychological moment for my parents inside a luxury hotel, which felt slightly insane. Emma, Natalie said gently, you don't have to do anything. I know. You could leave the greeting standard. Nobody ever connects the designer to the floor anyway. That was true. Guests usually assumed the hotel owned everything, which technically it did. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window. Part of me wanted to forget the entire thing. Let my parents enjoy their anniversary dinner. Pretend the coincidence never happened. But another part of me, I don't know, that part kept replaying my mom's voice in my head. You don't need to come. Not angry, not apologetic, just casual, like I wasn't part of the equation. Emma, Natalie said again, what do you want to do? I stayed quiet for a long moment. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. Do you remember my high school graduation? Natalie sounded confused. No. That's because you didn't know me yet, I said. Fair. I leaned against the window frame. My parents were there, I continued. My mom spent half the ceremony texting. My dad left early to take a work call. Natalie didn't interrupt. They didn't mean anything by it, I added quickly. At least, I think they didn't. Sometimes I still question that memory. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe I noticed it more because I wanted them to notice me. Memory does weird things like that. Anyway, I turned back toward the kitchen. I'm not trying to embarrass them, I said. I believe you. I hesitated. I think I want one moment where they realize something. What? That their daughter's life kept going even when they stopped paying attention. Natalie was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said softly, That's Faye. I sat down at the table again. So what exactly would Daniel say? Well, she replied, the greeting usually happens right when guests arrive. Lobby. Sometimes lobby. Sometimes the entrance to the dining floor. I pictured the scene in my head. My parents arriving, maybe a little early. My mom adjusting her coat. My dad checking his watch. Daniel stepping forward with that calm hotel manager smile. Welcome. Pause. You're guests of your daughter. I shook my head slightly. This still feels unreal. Natalie chuckled. Most poetic moments do. I sighed. Then finally I said the thing that apparently decided everything. Okay. Okay, what? If Daniel is comfortable saying it. I paused. Then the greeting can be personalized. Natalie let out a low whistle. Well what? That's going to be a very interesting evening. I rubbed my temples. I suddenly feel like I'm making a terrible decision. You might be. Thanks. But honestly, she added. Yes. I think it's going to be a very quiet moment. What do you mean? I mean, she said, nobody's going to yell. Nobody's going to argue. She paused. Your parents are just going to realize something they never expected. I stared at the table. Yeah, I said softly. I think that's the point. Later that afternoon, Natalie called Daniel back. I wasn't on the call, but afterward she texted me one sentence. Greeting confirmed. And just like that, my parents' anniversary dinner became something else entirely. The strange part, for the next 3 weeks, I almost forgot about it. Almost. But every now and then I'd suddenly remember the date and wonder what their faces would look like the moment someone said my name. The anniversary dinner was on a Saturday. I remember that because Saturdays at the Westbridge were always busy. Weddings, corporate parties, tourists wandering through the lobby like they'd accidentally stepped into a movie. The whole place had this constant quiet buzz. I wasn't planning to be there that night. At least, that had been the plan. But around 4 in the afternoon, Natalie called me. "Where are you?" she asked. "At home." "You're not coming." I frowned. "Coming where?" "The hotel," she said. I sat up a little straighter. "Why would I come?" There was a small pause. "Emma," Natalie said carefully, "you know your parents' dinner is tonight, right?" "Of course I know that." "Okay, just checking." I rubbed my face. "I told you I wasn't crashing their anniversary dinner." "I know," she said, "but Daniel thought you might want to stop by earlier." "For what?" "To see the orchid room before the event." That actually made sense. The dining floor had officially opened only a week earlier. I'd been so busy with other projects that I hadn't seen it fully set up yet. Still, the timing felt suspicious. "Natalie." "Yes." "You're not secretly trying to stage a dramatic moment, right?" She laughed. "No, the dramatic moment is already scheduled for 6:30. I groaned. "You terrible." "Maybe. But you should come see the room," she added. "It looks amazing." I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to be anywhere near the hotel that evening. But another part of me, well, it was my project. And honestly, I was curious. "Fine," I said finally. "I'll stop by for a few minutes." Natalie sounded pleased. "Good. Daniel's here already." Of course he was. Hotel managers practically live inside their buildings. About 40 minutes later, I walked through the front doors of the Westbridge. The citrus smell hit me immediately. Same as always. The lobby was busy. A couple arguing quietly near the elevators. A group of tourists taking pictures of the chandelier. And behind the front desk, Jordan Miles spotted me. "Good afternoon, Ms. Carter," he said with a grin. "Hey, Jordan." He leaned slightly over the desk. "Big night upstairs." I froze for half a second. "Is it?" He nodded. "Anniversary party on the orchid floor. Mr. Ortiz has been making sure everything's perfect." "Right. Of course." I forced a small smile. "Well, that sounds nice." Jordan tilted his head a little. "Are you heading up?" "Just for a minute." He gestured toward the elevators. "Daniel's already there." I thanked him and walked across the lobby. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. I kept telling myself this was normal. Just another site visit. Just checking on the design work. Nothing weird about it. But when the doors opened on the dining floor, my stomach still did that little nervous flip. The hallway lighting was exactly the way I remembered. Soft gold. Warm reflections along the walls. At the far end of the corridor, the orchid dining room doors were open. Inside, I could hear voices. I stepped closer. Daniel was standing near the windows talking with Victor Alvarez, the restaurant floor manager. Victor noticed me first. "Ms. Carter," he said with a friendly nod. Daniel turned. "Emma." Perfect timing. I walked into the room slowly, and for a second I just looked around. It's a strange feeling seeing something that used to exist only in your head become real. The curved table was set with white linen. Soft lighting glowed across the walnut walls. The river outside the windows reflected the evening sunlight. Natalie wasn't exaggerating. It looked beautiful. I walked over to the wall installation, ran my hand lightly across the wooden panels. "I still can't believe the contractor fixed that seam," I muttered. Daniel chuckled. "They had excellent motivation." Victor smiled politely but looked slightly confused. He probably didn't know the full design story. Daniel gestured toward the table. Dinner service will start at 7, he said. Guests arriving around 6:30. Right. 6:30. I glanced at the large clock near the door. 5:48 p.m. Still some time. Victor checked his tablet. Staff briefing in 10 minutes, he said. Daniel nodded. Then he turned back to me. You doing all right? Yeah, I said quickly, just admiring the room. He studied my face for a moment. You know, he said carefully, if tonight feels uncomfortable, we can adjust the greeting. I shook my head. No, you're sure? Yeah. Actually, I surprised myself with how sure I sounded, because at that moment, the situation didn't feel dramatic anymore. Just interesting. Like watching a small story unfold. Victor looked between us. Greeting, he asked. Daniel smiled slightly. Oh, just a personalized welcome for the guests. Victor nodded. Understood. He walked out to organize the staff, leaving Daniel and me alone in the room. For a minute we both looked out the windows at the river. Then Daniel spoke again. You know, he said, hotel work gives you a front row seat to a lot of family dynamics. I laughed quietly. I can imagine. Birthdays, reunions, weddings. He paused. And sometimes, surprises. I glanced at him. You think this will be a surprise? Daniel smiled politely. I think your parents will learn something new tonight. I didn't answer, because honestly, I wasn't sure what they would learn, or how they would react, or if the moment would even matter. A few minutes later, Natalie arrived. She walked in carrying her phone and immediately stopped. Okay, she said. This still looks incredible. Thank you, I said. She grinned at me. You're nervous. I am not. You absolutely are. Daniel checked his watch. Staff briefing in 5 minutes. Natalie glanced at the clock. 6:12 p.m., which meant something very simple. My parents were probably already on their way, and suddenly, the room felt a little smaller. Natalie leaned closer to me and whispered, So, are you staying? I blinked. What? For the greeting. Oh, I hadn't actually thought about that part. Being present would change everything, but leaving would mean hearing about it later instead of seeing it. I looked toward the hallway. Somewhere downstairs the lobby doors would be opening. Guests arriving. Coats being taken. Quiet greetings. I took a slow breath. I'll stay, I said. Natalie smiled. Good. And just like that, the clock kept ticking toward 6:30. By 6:25, the hallway outside the orchid dining room was quiet. Not empty, just prepared. That's the best word for it. Staff moving calmly. Glasses clinking softly somewhere in the background. The kind of quiet efficiency hotels are weirdly good at. Victor was giving the final instructions to the servers near the entrance. Daniel stood beside the doorway, checking something on his tablet. Natalie and I were a little farther down the hall near the window. I was pretending to admire the river again, which, honestly, I'd been doing for about 10 minutes. Emma, Natalie whispered. You're pacing. I looked down. I was back and forth across the same stretch of carpet. Oh, relax, she said. I am relaxed. You're doing that thing with your hands. What thing? She gently grabbed my wrist. This thing. Apparently, I had been twisting my ring around my finger. I stopped. Okay, maybe I'm slightly nervous. Natalie smiled. Understandable. I checked the time on my phone. 6:28 p.m. 2 minutes. My heart started beating a little faster. Not panic, just anticipation. I kept reminding myself that this wasn't a confrontation. Nobody was going to argue. Nobody was going to yell. It was just a sentence. One greeting. That's all. Still, I couldn't stop imagining my mom's face. At 6:31, the elevator dinged down the hallway. All the staff movement paused almost instantly. Victor straightened his jacket. Daniel closed his tablet. Natalie nudged my shoulder. Showtime, she whispered. I felt my stomach drop. We couldn't see the elevator from where we stood. but we could hear footsteps approaching down the carpeted corridor. Several people. Light conversation. Then a voice I recognized immediately. My mom. "Oh, this place is beautiful," she was saying. Her voice sounded exactly the same as it always had. Warm, pleasant, carefully social. Another voice followed. My dad. "Yes, very nice." Then Brian. "Did you book this months ago?" Their footsteps grew closer. I instinctively stepped farther back toward the window, not hiding exactly, just out of the immediate line of sight. Natalie stayed beside me. The group turned the corner. I saw them. My parents. Brian, Maya and Mark, Sandra Lewis, a couple other relatives, about 10 people total. They slowed when they reached the orchid dining room entrance. Victor greeted them first. "Good evening," he said politely. "Welcome to the Westbridge Grand." My mom smiled. "Thank you." Daniel stepped forward then. Calm, professional, exactly the way he always looked. "Good evening," he said. "My name is Daniel Ortiz, the general manager here." My dad shook his hand. "Nice to meet you." Daniel nodded. "And congratulations on 30 years. My mom laughed softly. "Thank you, that's very kind." For a second I wondered if maybe Daniel would just stop there, keep the greeting normal, safe. But then he continued, exactly the way we had discussed. "Before we bring you to your table," he said calmly, "I wanted to welcome you personally." Everyone listened politely. My brother had his hands in his pockets. Sandra was adjusting her purse. Maya was looking around the room. And then Daniel said the sentence. Very simple, very calm. "Tonight you are guests of your daughter." There was a small pause. I saw my mom's smile freeze. Daniel continued. "She is the designer and host of this dining floor." The hallway went completely quiet. No music, no clinking glasses, nothing. My dad frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, what?" Daniel turned gently toward the room behind him. "Emma," he said, "you're welcome to join us." Natalie gave my arm a tiny push. And suddenly, every pair of eyes turned toward the window. Toward me. For a second nobody moved. My mom blinked twice, like she was trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "Emma," she said. I stepped forward slowly. "Hi," I said. Not dramatic, not angry, just normal. My brother's eyebrows shot up. "Wait," he said. "You designed this place." My mom looked around the room again, at the walls, the lights, the table, then back at me. "You mean," she said slowly, all of this?" I nodded. "Yeah." For a moment nobody spoke. Then Maya suddenly laughed. Not in a mean way, more like shocked. "Emma," she said, "you never told us." I shrugged a little. "I guess nobody asked." That might have sounded harsher than I intended. I'm still not sure. My dad looked around the room again. I could see him studying the details now. The walls, the lighting, the huge windows. "You designed this entire floor?" he asked. "Most of it." Brian shook his head. "Okay, that's actually insane." Sandra looked impressed. "I had no idea," she said. My mom was still staring at me. Not angry, not embarrassed, just confused, which honestly felt stranger than anything else. Finally she said something very quiet. "When did this happen?" I hesitated. "Over the last year." There was another silence. Then Daniel gently gestured toward the dining room. "Your table is ready," he said. The group slowly moved inside. But as they passed me, my mom paused. Just for a second. She looked around the room again, then back at me. "You did all this?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Yeah." She stared for a moment longer. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "I wish you had told us." And that sentence honestly surprised me more than anything else that night. For a second after my mom said that, "I wish you had told us," I honestly didn't know how to respond, because the sentence sounded sincere, but it also felt strange, like we were both remembering the past a little differently. The group continued into the orchid dining room, chairs sliding softly across the floor. Low conversation starting again. Victor and the servers began pouring water and placing menus. Everything returned to normal hotel rhythm, except my mom was still standing in the doorway with me. My dad was already halfway to the table. Brian had pulled out a chair. Maya was looking between my mom and me like she was watching a tennis match. My mom glanced around the room one more time. "You really designed all of this?" "Most of it," I said again. She ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the walnut wall panel, the same wall I had obsessed over for weeks. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. Something about hearing that from her felt complicated. Nice, but also a little late. And honestly, I don't think she realized that. My dad turned from the table. "Emma," he said, "you should join us." That caught me off guard. I blinked. Oh, I wasn't planning to stay. Brian leaned back in his chair. "Why not? It's your place apparently." I smiled a little. Not exactly my place. Natalie, who was still near the doorway, coughed softly. "Technically." I shot her a look. She raised her hands. "Okay, fine." My mom was watching me carefully. "Are you sure you can't stay?" she asked. For a second, I considered it. Actually, I almost said yes, but something about the moment didn't feel right. This dinner was still their anniversary, and I didn't want the entire night to turn into a conversation about me. "I think you should enjoy your evening," I said gently. "You booked a beautiful room." My dad nodded slowly. "Well, we certainly picked the right place." Brian laughed. "Yeah, apparently." Sandra leaned across the table. "Emma, you should be very proud." "Thank you." Maya was still smiling at me, but her smile looked a little different now, more thoughtful, like she was realizing something she hadn't realized before. After another minute, Victor approached me quietly. "Ms. Carter," he said, "we're ready to begin service whenever you'd like to step out." "Right. Work mode again." I nodded. "Of course." I turned back to my parents. "Well, happy anniversary." My mom hesitated. Then she stepped forward and hugged me, which honestly surprised me. She didn't hug me very often. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. The words landed somewhere deep in my chest, but I also noticed something else. She said it like she was discovering it in real time, like the idea had just occurred to her, not something she'd always known. And somehow that made the moment feel more honest. My dad shook my hand, which was very on brand for him. "You've done something impressive here," he said. "Thank you." Brian gave me a quick sideways hug. "Okay," he said. "I clearly need to ask more questions about your life." "That might help," I said. He laughed. Then I stepped back toward the doorway. Victor signaled to the staff. Service began. Plates moving. Glasses filling. Quiet dinner conversations starting around the table. From the hallway, I watched them for a moment. My parents sitting under the warm lights, talking with friends, occasionally glancing around the room again, like they were seeing it differently now, like they were seeing me differently. Natalie walked up beside me. "Well," she whispered, "that went better than expected." I nodded slowly. "Yeah." She nudged my shoulder. "Feel good?" I thought about it for a second. Honestly, the feeling wasn't victory, or revenge, or even closure. It was something quieter than that, more like balance. For years, my parents had pictured me a certain way, the quiet daughter, the one with the design thing. And tonight, without any big speech or argument, that picture changed, not because I forced it, just because the truth happened to be standing in front of them. Natalie leaned against the wall. "So," she said, "are you glad you did the greeting?" I watched through the doorway as my mom laughed at something Maya said. My dad was pointing at the wall panels again, explaining something to Brian. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I am." Natalie smiled. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "You didn't have to prove anything." I thought about that, and I think she was right. Because the real moment wasn't Daniel's greeting. It was the look on my parents' faces when they realized something simple. Their daughter had built a life they never bothered to ask about. And somehow, she turned out okay anyway. Actually, more than okay. Sometimes people underestimate you for so long that they stop checking. They assume they already know who you are. And life quietly keeps moving without them. So now I'm curious about something. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have stayed completely invisible? So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far AITA travels. Sometimes the loudest answer is simply letting the truth speak for itself.